Welcome back to the OPEX podcast. On today's episode, I am joined by Dr. Ciaran Fairman, PhD, who is an exercise physiologist who specializes in exercise oncology. Ciaran is currently completing his postdoc at Edith University in Perth. And on this episode, we discuss everything to do with Ciaran's research around exercise oncology. Guys, this was a fascinating conversation with Ciaran. I know you're going to love it. Stay with us. Gordon, thank you so much for making time to speak with me today. How are you doing?
It's no problem. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat.
Yeah, listen, just for the listeners, I literally emailed Ciaran and then boom, go back to me like within I don't know, not even half an hour. Like, yeah, sure. How about 2 days time? I'm like, okay. And just for the listeners to give some context, I live in Ireland and Ciaran's in Perth right now. So there's a bit of a time difference and a time there. Well, that's not too bad. You're 7 hours ahead, but still you get back to me pretty soon.
You're misrepresenting me, because if I had have saw that email and I was busy, you wouldn't have heard from me for 3 weeks. So it's just, I'll either get back to you within seconds or you won't hear from me ever again.
Yeah. Because now you'll probably get some other requests like, that fucker never got back.
Exactly. And then I'll read them and then I just reply in my head and keep on living my life and leave people hanging.
That's actually, you just said something there and you just worded something so perfect that I finally have a way to say that. I replied in my head, because I do that all the time too. It's like, but I did reply. It's like, oh no, I didn't. I replied in my head. I do that all the time. Yeah, it's like, yeah, you do that. It's like, like you see a text message and you're like, right, yeah, and you're like, they're like, what did you reply? It's like, I did. It's like, oh, in my head.
I have the worst habit. I literally will click into the email, read it, then mark it as unread, so it comes back up in my inbox, and then I forget about it. It'd take me just as quick or just as long to reply to the thing than to go back out. But sure.
It's the life of a researcher, Ciaran.
Yeah, that's it.
So, listen, you are doing some phenomenal work, like extremely important work when it just comes to human beings and life and cancer, obviously, which we'll get into. So, topic for this episode will be exercise oncology. So just for the listeners, give us your whole background. I love backgrounds, like everything, like where you're from, where you grew up, school, sports played, and basically how you got to where you are today. So whether you want to attack that from the end of the spectrum where you'll start from when you were young, or if you want to reverse engineer, say this is where I am now and this is how I got here, whatever way you want to go about it. But give us a good background on you.
Yeah, so I suppose right now I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the Exercise Medicine Research Institute at Edith University in Western Australia. And kind of my background is fairly long and varied. Grew up in Dublin, played football and Gaelic my whole life, and was lucky enough to get a scholarship for football over to the States when I was 18. So somehow convinced someone to bring me over to the States to kick a ball about and get some education, which for me was a dream, because I didn't have the opportunities coming out of secondary school that I probably should have had if I focused a bit more. I was so much into football, and unfortunately academics at the time kind of fell by the wayside. So to be honest, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to go to higher education were it not for the one to the States. And it turned out to be the best thing that happened to me. And it wasn't without challenges. I moved from, a big city in Dublin, Ireland, to a small rural town in Owensboro, Kentucky, which is kind of deep south USA. And the town itself had, I'd say, 40,000 people, and the college was about 600 or 700 kids. So it was just night and day in terms of what I was used to as an 18-year-old and living in Dublin to that type of environment. And the growth I made as a person there is just, again, it was the making of me, as challenging as it was. So I took the long way around to find what I'm doing now. I initially went over, thought I was going to be this huge superstar, get into professional football and never need school. And it turned out that I was much worse at football than I anticipated. Didn't get the opportunities, and injuries and all that type of stuff happened. But my education, again, it wasn't a priority for me for the first couple of years of college, to be honest. I was in the States, the structure is you take 2-ish years of general education before you specialize in your major or what you're going to study. So I went over playing football, and I was studying French, American history, religion, and things like this that I wasn't interested in at the time, and performed really poorly. So it was really lucky when I got down to graduating that I actually had opportunities. I changed my major 4 or 5 times across the board. I was psychology, business, biology for a day until I saw the curriculum. Then I moved quickly. I got lucky. My undergraduate mentor was out of academia for 7 years. He moved to the college and started a new major in health science. And the year he got there was my 3rd year where I was meant to declare a major. So met him and we hit it off straight away. He took such a personal interest in me, to the extent where he got me a job at his brother's restaurant to keep me going through college and all this type of stuff. And he flew me out to my very first conference, the American College of Sports Medicine, where I learned about the field of exercise oncology. So the kind of the touch there, or the kind of talking point there, was my own mother was diagnosed with breast cancer my 2nd year of college. Couldn't afford to go home. So I'm kind of listening over the phone to all of what she's going through the surgery, through radiation and chemotherapy, and having intense feelings of guilt, to be honest, with not being able to be home and be there for her. But as she was talking, listening to a lot of side effects she was facing through these treatments, the positive effects of exercise mirror those. So she was experiencing low energy, experiencing fatigue, losing muscle mass, becoming inactive, and all that type of stuff. So kind of starting to put 2 and 2 together. And again, my mentor, Jason Crandall, knew me personally, knew my story, knew about her, and knew of my passion of exercise physiology and how the body responds to different stress and stimuli. And so brought me out to the American College of Sports Medicine, heard about this group called the Rocky Mountain Cancer Institute through the University of Northern Colorado, who were doing this exercise oncology and working with people with breast cancer going through treatment. And it was like a drug. I could not get enough of it. And I was lucky. By the end of my undergraduate career, I came back from that conference and we set up a cancer rehab clinic in Owensboro. And then during that year, it was just a really insightful experience into some of the barriers and challenges to actually implementing this type of stuff, particularly in a rural area where there's some unique challenges as well. But I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to go and do a master's in human performance at Georgia Southern University. So at this time, I still thought I was kind of going to go strength and conditioning route. Loved every minute at Georgia Southern. Kentucky Wesleyan, the small college I went to for undergraduate, didn't even have a lab. Then I got to Georgia Southern, and they've got full DEXA, Bob Pod, the VO2 carts, everything, and I just could not get enough of it. And we did some really cool sports nutrition, human performance research, working with the American football team and the soccer team, and just looking at how various nutrition and training strategies can be used to optimize performance. But my personal interest in cancer really started to take over, and I did my master's thesis in an intervention with women with breast cancer. So really eye-opening experience again to work with these people, and it started to show me the divide and the impact it could have in the clinical world. So then I went up to Ohio State, where I did a PhD in exercise physiology, and was lucky enough, again, my mentor, Brian Foe, what that man has done for me cannot be summed up in words. But he was so gracious in letting me do a year-long internship as a strength and conditioning coach in Major League Soccer. Knowing my interest and what I thought I would wanted to do, he kind of said to me, look, it's better you figure this out now as a student and have 3 or 4 years after this to complete your studies and find your direction. Then go through 4 years of PhD, do this as a career, and then find out 2 or 3 years into your career as a full adult that you don't want to do it. So I was able to do that and get a really good experience of what it's like to work in professional sports as a strength and conditioning coach. Found it to be really enjoyable. Had some unique challenges, but the exercise oncology world just kept calling to me, and did a lot of our work in the exercise behavioral medicine lab, where we worked with individuals with endometrial cancer, with ovarian cancer, and with prostate cancer, and just trying to match the exercise stimulus to what they're going through in terms of treatment or their cancer diagnosis. So it was just a phenomenal experience that all of that has culminated in me having a really, I suppose, good background and knowledge in different applications of the principles of exercise physiology that I've been able to take to the clinical world and just try and see what we can do. And so a lot of my focus now at ECU is looking at how we can preserve or reverse muscle waste in individuals with cancer. So right now we're focused on men with prostate cancer receiving androgen deprivation therapy. ADT is a fairly common treatment for prostate cancer, and essentially what it does is castrate men. So it reduces testosterone to almost null. So intuitively and almost immediately, you start to see some fairly profound reductions in lean body mass, in bone health, and and even worsening the body composition through accumulation of fat mass. So you look at that and automatically say, well, resistance training surely has to be applied in if not reversing, at least minimizing the loss of these important tissues. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, and moving into the future, I'll kind of continue to explore the resistance exercise and muscle weighting space.
So currently, what do we know from a research standpoint when it comes to exercise oncology? From your latest episode, because I know you've been on Sigma Nutrition podcast twice, on your latest interview with Danny, I think you said the most of the research has been around breast, prostate, a bit of lung, and colon. That's where most of the research has been. So if you just want to maybe fill us in on what do we currently know, and then I suppose from your standpoint as a researcher and from other people in this field, what are we looking to find out?
Yeah, so I suppose you're right. The majority of work has been in the more common cancers, because doing this work is really difficult. In addition to all the unique challenges that come with trying to recruit participants and maintain a high quality, controlled environment to conduct research, you're also dealing with the burden of a cancer diagnosis and dealing with the burden of going back for appointments with doctors, to follow-ups, actually going through the treatment and physically going to the locations and clinics to go through 5 days a week of radiation and a day every few weeks for chemo. So doing work in this space is really challenging, and kind of as a way to kind of get into this space, a lot of it has been in the more common cancers because you've got more of a patient pool to draw from. So the summary is exercise is safe, potentially effective based on or dependent on the type of cancer you have and what stage you're at across the cancer continuum. So there's a really phenomenal paper by Kerry Cornier in 2011 or 2001, that pretty much summed up our field and gave us a lot of direction. That it's called the PEACE framework, that divides the cancer continuum across these kind of phases that give us not only a summary of the evidence, but also directions on how we shape our research. So in terms of the work and the history of it, most of the work started off in survivorship. Funny enough, the very first study in the 80s was in individuals with breast cancer going through treatment, looking at aerobic exercise. Found it was safe, a little bit effective, got some small improvements in cardiorespiratory fitness, but not much happened since then. It was kind of, the 90s were fairly quiet, and then some behavioral work started to emerge in the late 90s, early 2000s, where you're looking at just, can you get people active? Can they do it? And that's where Kerry came out with this paper where identified phases where we can put our research. So if you look at, day one cancer diagnosis, there is a wealth of research in the prevention space in what you can do from an exercise and lifestyle perspective to reduce your risk of cancer. So that is a whole body of evidence on its own. But in day one, you get your diagnosis. You have got X days before you have treatment. So that's the prehab phase. Very analogous to an ACL surgery. Like if we know you're going through surgery and you're going to have these decrements in tissue and function, what can we do to make your knee and surrounding tissue as strong and as healthy as we can before we have these to buffer some of the side effects? It's the exact same premise in exercise oncology, where we know you're going to receive surgery, chemo, and or radiation on day X. Now we're X minus whatever days we have. That could be months if it's an earlier stage cancer. It could be years if it's very low grade. For example, prostate cancer, the earliest stage may not get treatment for years, but it could be as little as a couple of weeks. In advanced lung cancer, where you have to have, part over half or all of a lung removed. So that space is so important to actually build whatever capacity we can from where you're at to buffer a lot of side effects of treatment. Because it's such a challenging space and such a short time, and you're dealing with trying to recruit patients while they've just received a cancer diagnosis. We have to understand that that's their priority. Not a lot been, all of that is kind of hypothesis driven. There's been some small studies that show varying degrees of effectiveness, but that needs a lot of work. During treatment phase, some really high quality research has been done in this space with varying degrees of effectiveness based on a variety of factors. Exercise can, at minimum, attenuate the decline in muscle strength, in cardiorespiratory fitness, in bone health to a degree, a minimum maintain or improve quality of life. The biggest case we have for the inclusion of exercise as standard of care in that treatment phase is that traditionally we have compared people who exercise to people who don't. The people who don't always get worse. The people who exercise at least stay the same. Now, of course, there's some outliers and individual responses within that, but that's the general trend we're seeing. So a lot of that has been done in breast and prostate. Breast during chemotherapy in particular, prostate during hormone therapy. And then you get into the survivorship phase where you're trying to, the acute toxicity of treatment have worn off. They're kind of getting back to normal fitness. Now it's kind of, can we keep them fit as long as we can to reduce the risk of recurrence? So that's kind of where we're at in terms of the cancer continuum and where we'd like to focus our research.
Something that came to my mind when, again, it's coming off your interview with Danny, when I heard like getting people who are going through like chemotherapy and, other cancer therapies and getting them to resistance train, like the one thing that kept coming to mind, I don't know why this is coming to my mind, like it was one of the top questions I wanted to ask was like, how hard is it to fuel the cancer patient? Because the way your appetite gets so suppressed on those treatments. And like my thing is like, how would do some of these individuals even one have the energy to like get enough stimulus through resistance training? And then like, if they're wasting away so much from a protein standpoint because they just can't stomach food, what are the certain strategies that, you guys are thinking of putting forth there? Is there, just, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a Pandora's box of question. In my experience and in looking at the literature, it hasn't, the appetite does vary, and it can be challenging to get sufficient calories in. But in the earlier stage, if you're looking at early stage breast cancer, if you're looking at, a lot of what I do is kind of localized or progressive prostate cancer, they can tolerate a lot of stuff. Chemo for breast is a less aggressive chemo because chemo isn't chemo. There's a lot of different agents, and different agents have different toxicities, and people are given these agents in different doses. So all of that is combined, like depending on the type of agent, the dose you have, and your schedule, you may have more or less toxicities than I do, and we may respond completely differently. So the appetite in the populations we work with isn't as challenging compared to the really aggressive conditions and the really progressive cancers can be really challenging to work with. And cachexia, cancer cachexia is this aggressive muscle wasting condition that occurs through a variety of factors. It's not just kind of natural aging and you're losing some tissue and function there. It's a very complex phenomenon that is, definitions are kind of always evolving, but essentially inflammation is through the roof as a result of the tumor itself, the treatments, kind of baseline levels. They directly or indirectly affect a lot of the pathways that are involved in the regulation of muscle mass. And specifically, they kind of play a fairly good role in switching, or at least dimming, the anabolic switch through muscle protein synthesis, tend to facilitate muscle protein breakdown. In addition to, you look at the likes of a head and neck cancer, where someone has got some, or half of their jaw removed because they've got a certain type of cancer, and then they're getting radiation to their throat. They can't get sufficient calories in to maintain the tissue. And then, funny enough, the inflammation can actually play a role in appetite hormones in the brain. So us just telling people, because the definition of cancer cachexia is the loss of muscle mass with or without fat mass, that cannot be alleviated by traditional nutritional programs, which essentially is saying, you're losing all this mass, why don't you eat some more? And it's kind of just, it's a fairly shallow way of approaching it. I think there's a really strong and urgent need to kind of do this kitchen sink approach and look at, there's actually a phenomenal trial called the MENAC trial right now, where there's a need to combine sufficient calories with adequate protein, with some sort of agent that's going to target inflammation, whether that's fish oils or actually NSAIDs. And then you've also got providing anabolic stimulus, so the tissue that they're accumulating is actually muscle mass. So in those populations, there's actually it's an understudied area, particularly when you look at, there's been a lot of work in nutrition, but applying the exercise has been really left to the side up until recent years. And we're working on a few projects coming up that we're trying to find a way to tackle this, because you look at some of the populations that are more at risk of muscle waste, and head and neck, for example. Head and neck treatment is renowned for being one of the most toxic, and people can lose up to 20 plus kilograms in as little as 6 to 8 weeks. So you're looking at, that's the rate of loss. It's a really profound rate of loss. And then trying to gain that back after treatment is really difficult. So one of the ways we're thinking of maybe approaching it is just like that prehab phase for conditioning. Can we prehab them and put them in a surplus before they go into treatment, and be okay with some of that extra tissue being fat mass, with the understanding that they're about to go into an extremely stressful situation where they're going to lose both muscle mass and fat mass. So trying to add a bit of a buffer in there, and then doing whatever we can from a resistance training perspective to actually maintain their tissue, because it varies quite a bit based on the tumor and a lot of different factors. But the tumor itself can actually carry an energy burden, and metabolism can increase with the kind of the burden of the tumor, and as the disease progresses to where you just cannot get out of catabolism. So we're painting a fairly easy picture, and like, yeah, we need to provide an anabolic stimulus and put exercise and combine it with nutrition and put it all together, but actually applying that on ground level is really challenging. So it is a really interesting topic, because you also have to look at, from an exercise perspective, a lot of the work has been aerobic. And, if you have any foundation in exercise physiology, it does cause you to question the rationale behind it. You can understand maybe from an information perspective, but if you're looking from a muscle preservation perspective, it's certainly not providing an anabolic stimulus. And if anything, if I put you on a bike and expend 300 extra calories and you can only consume 700 a day, I'm contributing to your energy deficit. So could we find a minimal dose approach from a resistance training perspective? What's the least calories we can expend that will maintain that tissue and then give you an overload from the nutrition and information perspective? So that's kind of the direction of my research, and trying to figure out a lot of those questions moving forward, as I move through my career.
You kind of touched on a follow-up question that I was going to ask, which is there much research around the different types of exercise in terms of its influence on cancer? So like, different stimuluses like resistance training versus aerobic versus maybe anaerobic, and then obviously through different modes too, has there been much like, free weight, multi-joint compound training versus isolation on a machine? I suppose again it's in context with the cancer too, but because I think on Danny's podcast too, you said like the old traditional model, just throw the kitchen sink and see what happens. Like, just a bit of weight training, bit of cardio, see how it goes. But is there any research coming out now that's just specifically looking at, distinctive exercise stimuluses and their impacts on certain cancers?
Yeah, and funny enough, one of the biggest trials Kerry Cornier led in 2007, the STAR trial, was 242 individuals with breast cancer going through chemotherapy, where he compared resistance training to aerobic training and kind of demonstrated what you'd expect. Those who, strength training get stronger, those who take part in aerobic training get fitter. I think there is more of an appreciation now for the need to investigate the different types, doses, intensities, and frequencies of training to try and provide a stimulus that's optimal. Because the field is so young. I mean, aside from the study from Winningham and McVicker in the 80s, really a lot of the work didn't take part till the mid-90s. So you're looking at 25 years of research, and the first 10 or 15 of that was based on safety. Because if I, at Edith County University, with the resources and infrastructure we have, go to any university or any hospital in Perth, I say, look, we've got 15 years of experience doing this. Here's all the research. They say, okay, yeah, let's try it. If I am in 2005 trying to do that same work, you're getting so much more resistance because people still don't appreciate or have even evidence that it's safe. So because of that, a lot of the earlier work was kind of a more broad approach, and let's see what they can do. Let's see if they can tolerate it. And it was really important work to give us the foundation to what we can do now. I think the directions moving forward are less about fitness outcomes, and we almost see fitness outcomes as evidence that they did the program rather than the target. So if I get you stronger during treatment, so what's the point of that? So we have now to shift our mindset into cardiotoxicity is a really important side effect of certain chemotherapy agents. So less about cardiorespiratory fitness and more about, can we design the aerobic training program to minimize any sort of cardiotoxic effects. Likewise with resistance training, the application is in how do we build a resistance training program that is individualized and tailored, but is also has principles of progressive overload to stimulate tissue enough to result in increases in strength or lean body mass or whatever your outcome is, knowing all the side of or the potential toxicities of low muscle mass. So there have been some pretty unique studies so far in the exercise ecology world, published in the last 5 or so years. One group in Norway did an undulating program. So instead of the traditional kind of 3 sets of 10 for 12 weeks, or even a 12, 10, 8, they did a daily undulating program where it was, I think it was 12, 10, 8 every day, or 12, 10, 8, 12, 10, 8. I found some good increases in strength. They didn't compare it to a usual care or a traditional model, so we don't really know to what effect it is better than or the same as. And then we're starting to look at how can we're starting to appreciate that the improvements they make in 12 to 16 weeks with us is irrelevant if they're not doing it 2 years later. So how can we build the program that is optimized to result in improvements in the outcomes of interest, but also optimized to improve adherence down the line? Because there is a fairly strong argument that those two programs aren't going to look the same. Yeah. Putting on a significant amount of muscle mass requires a great deal of stress and requires an intense program. Design a program that's aimed at the independent adoption and maintenance of exercise, and someone who's completely untrained and identifies as someone who doesn't exercise, comes with a ton of orthopedic limitations and barriers from their cancer and its treatment. It's completely different. So how do we match the two? Is it focus on one, and then while you're kind of working on that, you're building up strategies to foster maintenance? And then we're looking at thresholds. So, I said at the start, the question is, why does it matter if you get stronger during training? There's a lot of research, particularly with cardiotoxicity and muscle mass, that low performance in these measures. If you have low muscle mass, you're at a greater increase of treatment-related toxicities from chemo. Chemo is dosed based on your response, so it can be really toxic. And if your body isn't handling it, your schedule may be pushed back, or it may administer a lower dose. Your immune system is shot. Sometimes that means you end up back up in hospital because a cold turns into pneumonia and things like that. And there is a mountain body of evidence that indicates that low muscle mass is associated with increased toxicities, which then inherently you go, well, surely then increase in muscle mass would mitigate these. But we don't know how much we have to increase. We don't know if it's possible to do it in the time. We don't know if it's just the activity of performing the exercise that can potentially, mediate this effect. So there's a lot of really interesting unanswered questions that we have to look at, because this population is unique in that they're going through arguably one of the most traumatic experiences of their life for a lot of them, which means that the work that we have to do has to be meaningful. There's a kind of a common joke in the field of exercise oncology that we don't need another 12-week exercise program in breast cancer survivors. It's been done. If you are 10 years post breast cancer treatment, there may be some late effects of the treatment, but for all intents and purposes, you're good to go down to the local gym. You're good to find a general fitness program. Where we need the specialized programs is working with more advanced populations, work with rare types of cancer or people who are going to have complications, or even during treatment that require the knowledge and background of the treatments and complications to be able to match the program. But if you're finished, for the most part, you're fine. So a lot of unique challenges ahead.
You mentioned cardiotoxicity there a few times. Could you just, for the listeners, explain exactly what cardiotoxicity is?
Yeah, the most common indicator is left ventricular ejection fraction. So as your left ventricle contracts, it sends blood out to the body. There's some effects of the chemo seem to be impacting the tissue of the heart itself that can potentially reduce its contractility, but it impacts its ability to actually send blood out to the body. So it's a big concern, because arresting that decline is challenging, and left unaddressed, you're asking for cardiovascular disease down the line, or cardiovascular events. So obviously inherently you try to match aerobic exercise with that. But yeah, it's basically a loss of tissue and performance in the heart.
Can you speak about the reaction you've gotten so far from physicians within the field of oncology? So when you go to certain doctors, or whether it's at a conference, or if you're just actually kind of just reaching out to an oncologist and, proposing to them, listen, I work in exercise oncology. I think this is a very important work. I really think, that this could really help your patients. How has the response been from the different oncologists, or even just doctors at large that you've had a chance to interact with?
I'd say it varies for a lot of different reasons. I was a loud, ignorant young man when I started off in this research, and I was pointing a lot of fingers about why things didn't work or why there was challenges. And the more experience I've gotten, the more I realized I'm the idiot. But you have to look at what the medical team, the burden that they're under from an administrative perspective, and trying to do their daily tasks, trying to report back to their bodies and people that they've got to talk to, in addition to, oncologists seeing 40 plus patients a day. They may have substantial interest, but nowhere near the time or resources or energy to participate and actually refer patients. Some are huge advocates. There is some emerging evidence, and anecdotally I can kind of, support this. The people who are exercisers and are fit themselves appreciate the value of it, and they tend to be more on board. But it really just varies on their interest. We're fortunate to work with a lot of oncologists that are research oriented themselves, so they have research careers. So by approaching them with the opportunities to be on grants and be on papers, they're more invested in the project and more keen to refer to us. More broadly, it's the appreciation that they can help, but the lack of understanding how. So they don't feel comfortable that they're trained to actually, talk about this, which they're not meant to be the ones. The oncologist role, the medical professional's role, is to get individuals bought into the idea of it. Then they refer them to us where we can have more in-depth conversations about how and what we're going to do. But that 15 minutes with the oncologist means so much to if and how and when they're going to be interested in participating in exercise. So that's their biggest role, is trying to get people bought in and send them our way. So I will say I've been in this for about 10 years. The evidence has become a lot stronger, or at least, grown in size and number, and the awareness has come up as well. So with that, more people are kind of aware of what we're doing. So it's not as surprising to reach out cold to oncologists. It is the single biggest limiter to what we do, because if you don't have good oncologists on board, you can't do, not good, if you don't have people who are invested in what we do, you won't be able to do the work. So I'm looking to move back to the States and pursue an assistant professor and start up my own lab. And the unique challenge is that I have to develop good connections with local oncologists and develop that rapport and slowly build that research profile over the years, because unfortunately it's not as easy as just walking into a new city and just setting things up. It takes a lot of work to establish these relationships.
I can just see you now when you go back to America, just taking lads out for beers. Come on, we'll go to town to shop. So let me tell you about my lab. That'd be great. That'd be great. Very interested for you to share your thoughts on how hard you can actually train somebody with cancer. I think one thing that really struck me with your conversation with Danny was the early research. Obviously it's going to be very conservative, because it was kind of like Star Trek guy where no man has gone before. So obviously you're going to be a bit conservative, but the sense I got from you was like, okay, we know now that we can push this on a little bit. We can move beyond leg extension, leg curling. We don't always have to be treating these people as if there's something wrong with them, like putting that into their mindset from the get-go. Like, just treat them as if like they were any other clientele, but just be aware that there could be some contraindications. But talk about like how hard, in terms of training intensity, that people actually with a cancer diagnosis, again, context dependent given the cancer, as you've alluded to, with different cancers, obviously head and neck versus like a prostate, say, or something like that. You know well more than I do. But speak about that that certain, because there is a lot of coaches who listen to this, and there probably is a coach here who either has trained somebody with cancer or somebody who's post-cancer therapy. So it'd be good for the coaches to know like how to approach a client from terms of exercise intensity.
Yeah, so I'll preface this because I think I can get too excited about talking about intensity. I was lucky to collaborate with Dr. Mike Zordos and Dr. Eric Helms with a paper where we looked or made the call to apply auto-regulation in this population. So, the theory of the kind of history and theory of auto-regulation is basically modifying the training stimulus to match an individual's readiness to train. Coming from sports performance, it makes sense that we use various indicators of their readiness to train and then match the training load accordingly. If there's any population that needs that, it's individuals with cancer who experience extreme fluctuations in fatigue, energy, nausea, motivation, all of which impact your desire and propensity to receive a certain training stimulus. So when I say it is completely okay to see someone sweat, it is completely okay to see someone do a drop set and be burnt out after a workout, and you may question why they're doing that, but it's okay for them to work hard. It is within the context that not everyone who comes into my gym is working hard all the time, forever and always. And it is dependent on a lot of treatment-related factors, because immune function can be shot. They can be quite trained a lot of the time. So, the auto-regulation allows you to account for that. But when they have good days, you can attack them. Now, we're starting to kind of look at the timing of that around maybe the stress of receiving chemotherapy. Radiation is pretty intense, and it has its unique toxicities, particularly if radiation's to the chest wall, particularly left chest wall. There can be a lot of issues with fibrosis and some impact on cardiovascular control and function. And then there can be fibrosis in the lungs as well, which impact aerobic capacity. But chemo can be kind of the more toxic treatment in terms of the fluctuations you see in energy fatigue and all that type of stuff. So we're starting to look at how we center the exercise program around the timing of an infusion. I'll give you an example. In one of our current trials, we're working with men with prostate cancer receiving androgen deprivation therapy. That is a really, really broad eligibility criteria. Usually people will exclude different types of treatments. They'll try to identify a specific time. We pretty much opened the bucket. What that means is we've got someone who's 56, former triathlete, who we have in the gym, deadlifting, squatting, doing really heavy work, and he is working really hard. We had someone withdraw from the trial because they had a secondary diagnosis of lung cancer, was experiencing or kind of had a concurrent diagnosis of fibrosis in the lungs, experiencing quite a bit of dyspnea to where they couldn't finish a full set. So they couldn't get through 10 repetitions, and we had to modify the program so intensely. And that's within the same cancer population. So that variability exists on a magnitude of scale across, when you say exercise in cancer, like there's so many factors that will impact the ability to train a certain way. And a lot of people are older adults, so they come with a lot of orthopedic limitations and literally the consequences of living in a body for 60 plus years and all the things that come with that. So it's an interesting field like that, because you can really work people hard. And we're actually starting to see that maybe it's a more efficient way of doing things, particularly with HIIT training. HIIT training is becoming really, I'd say popular, but there's becoming a lot of investigations in HIIT training and lung cancer as a way to try and effectively stress the system and maintain cardiovascular fitness. There's a phenomenal researcher, Morten Quist in Copenhagen. You said it there, where we are probably one of the only positive sources in their life for a certain amount of time. They're going through treatment. They're sitting in a chemo ward for 4 to 5 hours at a time. They're going back to their doctor and hearing how things are going. And a lot of that means that we're the ones that have to be positive and bring that energy to them. And we can't be sympathetic. That is a horrific statement. We can be sympathetic, but it can't be like, we have to let them decide. Because some people will come in and say, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I'm going through a lot. I don't want to work out today. I just want to sit in the bike and have a chat. Absolutely no problem. You've got other people who don't even want to talk about it and just say, don't talk. I don't want to hear about it. I'm not a prostate cancer patient. I'm John. I've got this thing I'm dealing with right now. Let me train as a normal person. That becomes really important for the coaches that will listen to your show, because athletes with cancer are the most understudied population, and arguably some of the people that need this work the most, because they're the ones that are used to training so intensely and so heavily. And then when they get a diagnosis, you've got Mary on Facebook who shared a Netflix documentary saying that you can't do anything. You've got to rest. You've got cancer. And we need to give them the freedom to train the way they want to train, to feel like themselves. Because if you're an athlete and you identify as an athlete, that's the stuff that serves you. So unquestionably, there's some great documents. Exercise Sports Science Australia just brought out a document this year providing a really good overview of the challenges and contraindications and modifications you have to make. So there's absolutely modifications. But my kind of little side mission is to try and encourage coaches, trainers, and researchers to look at moving up that intensity ladder and looking at giving people the freedom to train hard, because they're going through chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, some of the most intense treatments that any disease can experience, and we're saying a few squats is going to hurt them. Like the stress of training is arguably much less than the stress of what they're going through. So, you know, within reason and with all the caveats, absolutely you can work hard.
So for all those people who don't have cancer, what's your excuse?
Jesus.
I love it. I love it. Come here. Very interested to get your thoughts, or not your thoughts, but share your insights into your work around cluster training, because I found that very interesting. You know, we've kind of touched on lung cancer there a little bit and the respiratory system, but it was very sort of intuitive when you said it, you know, that, well, we were getting people to do sets, but like they were gassing out, you know, with their lungs. So we're like, if we break these up into clusters, will they be able to do it? So I found that very, it was like, that makes a lot of sense. But you speak on that.
Yeah, it's something that I'm really interested in. The study's going through ethics now, so hopefully we'll be able to get it off the ground in the next few weeks. But it really came about from conversations with a good friend, Ciaran McIntyre, who does some phenomenal work in advanced lung cancer. So these patients or individuals are really kind of at the palliative stage of care. So they're kind of trying to maintain quality of life and, you know, have a fairly poor prognosis. But in speaking to her, she was talking about a lot of challenges and how to get people to exercise, and consistently one of the limiters of exercise kept coming out as their dyspnea or shortness of breath. So when we prescribe resistance exercise and we ask you to do a set of 10 to 12 repetitions, they couldn't perform it because they couldn't catch their breath. So a way to account for this more commonly is that people will drop the weight or the load to a load that will allow them to perform 10 or 12 consecutive repetitions. And there's some interesting work done on COPD that in aerobic exercise that kind of looks at HIIT training to try and account for similar fluctuations in dyspnea. So if you can tax them really quickly, let them recover, tax them again, it may be a more strategic way of prescribing aerobic exercise. The same principle applies for resistance training. We are working on trying to build a body of evidence for this and do some work in this space, but I would hypothesize that the local muscular fatigue is probably, you've greater capacity at the muscular level than you do through dyspnea or through the limitations of shortness of breath. So the rate limiting factor of exercise capacity is their ability to catch their breath. So if that's the case, if we can implement the cluster set approach, by every couple of seconds, we'll add in an additional rest period of anywhere from 15 to 30 seconds, do another 2 sets, do another 2 repetitions, take that break, let them catch their breath. You could potentially, at minimum, perform the same load or same volume with lower ratings of dyspnea, or potentially have a greater load, greater volume of training and similar ratings of dyspnea. So either way, it's worth exploring as a way to either have a more pleasurable response to the exercise, a more favorable response that will have implications for continued adherence, or as a way to accumulate extra training volume to potentially induce additional improvements in whatever you're looking for. So we're starting off with this pilot trial, and we're going to see what happens with it, and hopefully we can, you know, at least answer some of our questions.
Ciaran, going forward into the future, let's just say I say, I'm putting you in charge of it all. Everything, the universe, man. But when it comes to cancer treatments going forward into the future, what would you love to see implemented going forward? If we're talking holistically from, you know, from the kind of 360-degree sort of model of cancer therapy and rehab.
If you gave me the key to the best hospital in the world and said integrate exercise oncology into cancer care, that, like, I think it's a no-brainer, because at minimum you don't do harm. So my worldview, my big picture view is the hospitals across the country and across the world will have a rehabilitation clinic in their centers. So, and in addition to registered dietitians, in addition to psychologists, where you have the holistic approach, because RDs are already integrated, psychologists are already integrated. Cardiac rehab didn't have the evidence that we had when cardiac rehab was established. So there's a kind of an ongoing discussion right now in the scientific community in when we're making a call for exercise to be standard of care, do we actually have the evidence to support that? And my thinking is like, you're going to spend 250 grand on a cancer treatment that can potentially extend life for one person for a few months, but you're not willing to chance investing that same pocket of money into what would potentially fund a clinic for 2 or 3 years to provide that service for anyone who comes through your doors. And let's do both. Why do we have to wait to the evidence to meet X before we implement this? So my goal is to continue to contribute to the literature, building that body of evidence, but also on the side, I'm really passionate about implementation and actually working with people and practitioners to find a way to adopt this in their local areas. And that comes through things like this, through podcasts, through I was fortunate to work with a company called Barbell for Boobs, where we developed an education model for over 700 gyms in the United States. So there's things like that where I'm intensely passionate about. We as researchers need to get out of our ivory tower, get down off our chairs and stop being so arrogant and actually interact with the real people that matter. I published this study on creatine and prostate cancer, and there's going to have 50 people in it. It will take 4 years. A few people read down the line, and we have a snippet of information that someone goes, it's might worth looking at creatine. That's cool. What I could do in that same 5 years when I work with people on the ground that are in the trenches doing this stuff can have tenfold of an impact. So I'm intensely passionate about, producing really high quality science, but also doing the work that probably matters the most in terms of broad impact.
Last question here for you before I just go into some of our quick fire round ones. Even though I say they're quick fire round and people always are like, these aren't quick fire at all. These are profound life questions. But something I did mean to ask you was, is there any contraindications to exercise with certain cancers that we know of?
Yeah, quite a few. I would direct people to the Exercise and Sports Science Australia guidelines that just came out in 2019. They're open access. The American College of Sports Medicine has a roundtable paper in 2010 that was published. They are publishing a new set of guidelines this year, so they'll be out in the coming months. But broadly, it centers around cardiac function and hemodynamics. So immune functions through the floor. It's a contraindication to exercise because if your immune function is so shot, your doctors will not let you leave the house because exposure to any sort of stress or anything that will potentially impact your immune function, they're not going to let you do. So for the people that would be listening to this podcast that aren't working in supervised clinics in hospitals where these things are more of an issue, the standard, screening tools apply. Screen for cardiovascular conditions, screen for musculoskeletal contraindications. But as far as directly implicates the cancer itself, there are things to be concerned about. If people are receiving chemotherapy through a port, for example, it can be inserted under the skin in the chest wall, and different types of movements can dislodge that, which will require them to go back through surgery and get it, readjusted. So there's things like that are kind of beyond the scope of a quick answer, but are really clear and detailed in those documents that I think people will get a lot of value from.
Great stuff. Yeah, I'll make sure to link those in the show notes. What's the biggest lessons you've learned so far in your life and your career?
I'm an idiot.
I'm in that club too.
I've made every single mistake that you can possibly make as a practitioner and as a researcher. I was young, dumb, and arrogant. I thought I knew all the answers. I thought I knew the best way. I was searching. I'd say the biggest thing I've changed my mind on is the whole search for the best way of doing things and the optimal prescription. And I think so many of us males in particular start off in the field looking at things and how things are implemented with such harsh judgment. And like, this is how you periodize, this is how you program. And I can't believe they don't have a squat in there. Why are they not deadlifted? And then the more experience I've gotten, the more people's preferences matter, the psychology of behavior change matters, resources matter, infrastructure matters, external stressors matter, the orthopedic limitations matter, and then just the person themselves matter, to where I've become a lot more flexible with how I design and implement programs to how I used to be as a rigid 22-year-old, and there's only one way to do it. And then the joy of helping others is something that I think can't be matched. I was a really angry young man, particularly before I left Ireland, and I took that anger out on a lot of people, and the challenges I faced and the people that picked me up when I was in low parts in America in particular really showed me the value in looking out for others. And since I've taken on that approach, and I really enjoy mentoring young undergraduate and graduate students, it is one of the most fulfilling aspects of what I do. And that approach to my life has made every part of my life better.
How do you learn? What's your learning process?
Give myself an unreachable deadline and panic. I just through my own curiosity, in terms of what I learned from my job in getting people smarter than me to offer the time and knowledge to talk to me. I'm lucky that I have a podcast where I can talk to world experts in my field and in related fields about their areas of interest. So, in terms of how I learn, it takes on a lot of different forms, from reading scientific papers to talking to people to just chilling out and reflecting on everything I've been, has been going around in my head. But yeah, I don't have a specific strategy.
Very good. I always pause when I say this because I always think of Andy Galpin, because Andy Galpin hates this next question. He was asked this question on the Mind Muscle Project. He's like, I hate this question. But other people like it, and I like it. Is there anything you do on a daily basis that you feel is essential to your day?
No, Danny asked me this as well, or something similar. And there's just it's such a pressure to deliver something profound. I will say I need caffeine. Yeah. If I don't have caffeine, people are in danger. And I've no bones about saying that it's a full-on addiction. Because I typically get up at about 5:00 or 6:00 in the morning. If I sleep in on the weekends, at 9:00 I'll wake up with a headache because I haven't had caffeine yet. So I think I'd like to say I meditate, standing on my head, and I reflect for 20 minutes before I go to work. But it's usually a much more set out my to-do list, rush around, stick an apple down my throat, and leg it out the door. So I'm not. I don't have it all together.
Man, I'll have to school you on your circadian rhythms. That's awful.
Man, I'm the worst idea or representation of health and fitness.
What if you are what is your top book recommendation, and what are you currently reading if you are reading? That's why I said if you are there to start. So what would be your top book recommendation, and what are you currently reading if you are reading any material? It can be a book in any domain. It doesn't have to be specifically towards health and wellness.
The book I'm reading right now is Lost Connections. I can't remember the author. It's actually an Audible book, and it's phenomenal for me because it's a lot about how our mental health as a global crisis is resulting from lost connections and social media and being on our phones all the time and not actually being present with people, but also how we build communities around ourselves. And for me, I'm kind of a nomad. Like, I left Ireland at 18 and I haven't lived anywhere more than 4 years. So I've had a lot of challenges in trying to continuously rebuild my community and reestablish networks of people that are close to me. That the more I go through that book, the more it kind of reinforces my idea that Ireland is built on that. And I think it's one of the most special things about our country is we're built on local connections and the community and our local parishes. You don't find that in different countries, particularly America is so huge and vast that it can be more challenging. So that's something that's really speaking to me at the minute, and I'm trying to figure out ways to implement that in my own life. I'm going to kill myself because I love this book. I think it's called Blink by Steven Pinker, is the best book I've read.
Mm.
He has just Steven Pinker is a great author, and I think he has some really cool combinations of neurology and psychology in how he explains how the world works. And he's got a couple of really good books that are worth checking out, but I think Blink is the one that I recall being very good.
Cool. Yeah, I'll stick those in the show notes. Just something off the back of what you said there. There's potentially, like myself, there's people listening to this who are, doing a master's and contemplating, doing a PhD, and just kind of, you spoke there, you've been a nomad for the last number of years, just with all your research and travels and all that. Can you maybe just speak about, your whole journey there? Like, I know you gave us your background, but kind of just maybe speak a little more about this whole journey of your academic journey, and like what is it really like to be in the field you're in terms of research, in terms of academia, all these things of getting grants, of like leaving home, of never really having a settled place. Just kind of give us that whole insight into that, because like myself, like I'd be very interested as someone who wants to go on and do a PhD, and I'm sure there's other people who'd be very interested to get an insight from someone with your background.
Oh
shit! That was a big sigh. Here we go.
A lot of weight. So my journey, as I said, is a little unique because I'm strongly passionate. I talked to you about the other podcast I'm starting with a couple of friends about the culture of academia. There's some unique things about academia that make it more challenging in terms of mental health, but I'm a strong advocate and proponent for, just looking after yourself and having open discussions about mental health. Leaving Ireland was the hardest thing I've ever done. I was 18. I was, at the time I was offered a professional contract to stay in Ireland and play football. And I left that to go to a team in Kentucky that were not a good team. The events that happened led me to here. So it was the best decision I made in terms of my life. But at the time, football being so important to me, I thought it was the end of the world. I went from, 2 months ago being offered a professional contract to now getting spanked 12-0 by all these teams. And the culmination of all that, I really struggled with Kentucky. I really struggled with the culture there and how different I was. Found it very hard to make friends. And then my sophomore year of college, I got caught shoplifting and almost got kicked out of college, and things were just spiraling out of control for me. I had no control. I ended up with, I became bulimic for the guts of 2 years. And then when my mom went through cancer, it was just all together. It was a bit of a nightmare, and I ended up trying to commit suicide my sophomore year of college. And the journey since then has been a consistent strive to just put myself and others in good spaces in their mental health. And it's made me really passionately against some of the innate cultures of academia that thrive on our ability and desire to work really hard, because the people who are drawn to academia are intensely curious about what they do. Academia is unique in that there aren't metrics of success, in the sense that the metrics are hopefully starting to change, but right now it's a numbers game. If you publish X amount of publications, you win. If you get X amount of dollars, you win. That's how you get your job opportunities. That's how you get promotion. That's how you get tenure. And that can, if you let it, feed a really, poor team environment of where you're working at specifically, but also your own mental health, because the clock never stops. The first time it happened was my Thanksgiving break during my master's. I came back and my mentor was like, how'd you get on? Like, how was the break? And I said, I couldn't turn off. I was with my friends and I couldn't stop thinking about the projects. And she was like, yeah, you're in it now. That's what it's like. And she was right. Like, our field, being a scientist, requires so much devotion to your craft. and you can always improve in your understanding of scientific theory, in your design of research methods, in your own understanding of, airfield of exercise physiology and biology. So there's always this burning thing in the back of your head of, there needs to be more, I need to know more, I need to do more. And that can spiral out of control. And it's something that I've worked hard to cultivate in the labs that I've been in, is having those off switches and having a really good work-life balance. And there's some labs, my biggest advice and my best advice to people are looking at pursuing research in labs. The single biggest determinant factor of your success and your quality of life and experience is the mentor you have. So too often people get in the mistake of chasing a name. And I've seen it firsthand, and I've had too many secondhand reports for it not to be a thing. Generally, the bigger names are absent. Even worse, they're toxic. So I'd encourage, when you're looking at potential mentors for a PhD program, talk to their current students, talk to their current form or their former students, talk to as many colleagues as you can. Get a sense for who they are as a person and how they mentor. Get a sense from them what their leadership style are, what their expectations of you are. Because I was fortunate to be in a lab where my boss, Fo, was like, go and work in the MLS for a year. We'll cover your stipend, but have that experience. And then as different things came up in my personal life, he forced me to stop working, because I'm me, like I can't turn off. And he literally had to like kick me out of the office, like, go home and shit. Like, I had thrown my rotator cuff, I had surgery in the morning, and I tried to come back to work that afternoon. And he was like, you're an idiot, go home and relax. And that has been, a struggle for me, but I've kind of really started to grasp it now. And I've seen the other side of it, where there's certain mentors that will say, particularly in the States, your stipend is for 20 hours of work. So you come into the lab, you're doing your bits, maybe you're teaching, but they expect 60 hours of work for you, because it's the nature of what we do really in research, and your demands are you're always stretched thin. But that can't come at the consequence of your mental health, and it certainly can't come at the consequence of your financial status. And I've seen, like, I had to donate plasma twice a week in my PhD program to survive, and I would go from delivering a lecture in the med school to going that evening to work on someone's backyard and be a landscaper for them. And having those two kind of polar opposite experiences were really humbling for me. The environment you're going to go into is the biggest, it's the most important thing, and it's something that people don't take serious enough. People just say, I'm going to do a PhD, I'll find someone. And the most telling thing about what your potential mentor is going to be is not if people bash them, because good people are good people and they won't openly bash colleagues. But the less they say about them speaks volumes. If you say, what's Ciaran Fairman like? And they say, his lab does good work, and that's it. That's a huge warning flag. But if you come to me and say, what's Brian Fout like at Ohio State? I'll say, it's unbelievable. I loved my 4 years there. He knows my family. He met my dad at my graduation. There's 6 of us in the lab, and we love each other, and we're like a family. I would encourage anyone to go there. You see automatically the differences in how people are talking about them. So as much as the graduate experience is about learning your craft, and it's almost an apprenticeship to become a scientist, it's equally as important in learning what it's going to be like to be in this game long time, because those mentors are going to be colleagues, and they're going to be people that you may or may not have to navigate throughout your career. So that's kind of my biggest advice there.
I really, truly appreciate that answer. So thank you so much for sharing all that information. No, seriously, that's invaluable information. Last one for you. I'm taking you for dinner, and I say, Ciaran, you can bring 5 people to this dinner. They can be dead or alive. They can be fake or real. So like they can be superheroes as well. Who would you bring to this dinner and why? So 5 people, they can be dead or alive, and they can be real or fictitious characters.
Steven Gerrard,
Yes. You Liverpool man.
Sport of Liverpool. We
Same.
made it through all the bad times. We're finally on the come up. Love to pick his brain. I don't think he gets interviewed enough. I think his perspective on what it takes to be consistently elite for that long is just insane. And he just cuts through all the noise. 5. My dad, didn't have a great relationship with him up until about 5 years ago, and we're really starting to work through that and become closer. And as he's starting to get older, just want to keep listening to his stories and getting to know him better as a man. 5. My good friend Laura Marcotte is doing her master's program, or doing her master's at UBC in Canada. Just such a cool person. She is mature beyond her years and has really cool perspectives on science and life and training and all that stuff. And we always aim for 5-minute catch-ups that end up being 4 hours. Lewis Capaldi, out of nowhere, I think he is one of the funniest people I've ever come across. I think like he came out of nowhere with his music and just how he conducts himself and how his approach to being able to not take himself serious but take his craft really serious is really, really cool. And I would like to, I suppose I have to go for a career. I'd like to talk to, I don't know, have anyone specific, but one of the founders, like some of the first ex-Phys people. We pretty much know it all, you know what I mean? Like we're working in our little different disciplines, but in terms of what exercise does to the body, like, that's been done. I had the fortune to listen to Bruce Gladden speak a few years back about lactate, and he pretty much is Mr. Lactate. And their level of understanding, along with their personal stories of living through scientific discovery, is so cool. So I suppose someone like that.
Yeah, great stuff. Appreciate you making the effort, because sometimes I ask that question and people are like, oh, I don't know, because they always want their answer like so profound, like their guests. But really appreciate that. Ciaran, this has been a phenomenal conversation, and obviously I'll say good luck to you offline. But for people who want to reach out to you, get in contact with you, follow your work, where's the best place for them to go?
I always wanted to say this because too many people say it on my podcast. Just Google me. I have my own podcast called Reach Beyond Cancer, and our research and exercise and health, and it's hosted on the website Reach Beyond Cancer, where I interview world-leading experts in my field about their research and what they do. And I'm on all social media platforms as Ciaran Fairman. And then if you Google Ciaran Fairman at Edith Cowan, you can find my professional email there. So if there's any people want to collaborate or chat or anything like that, more than happy to talk there too.
Awesome stuff. So, guys, phenomenal episode here with Ciaran, and everything that was mentioned throughout the show will be in the show notes. But for now, until next time, peace.